House for 2 administrations. He said nonpartisan because he covered different...
Both parties?
Yeah. And he also worked for the State Department for many years. And today he will give us a brief tour of the fine art of writing, calligraphy, exploring the concepts of lettering, its place in society, and how it evolved over the millennia. So this is Mr. Rick Paulus.
Thank you all for coming out. Snow on us again, but it didn't happen. So yeah, I've put together this story that it's several stories in one, which helps to make it interesting. You get to learn a little bit about White House's role in diplomacy and at the White House and how it's used in Washington, D.C., and a little bit of the background of that world. And then it's a story of an artistic adventure. You know, when I left the White House, well, we'll get into the story, but when I left Washington, my work, the whole concept had changed. For 16 years as a professional artist, or 20 years, people had told me what they wanted done, menus, invitations, certificates. It was always laid out in front of me. When I came back to the Cape, I had a blank canvas and no clients. So I had that artist question, what am I going to say with my art? And we'll get into that. So here's where it goes. This is where it started. North Attleboro, Massachusetts, just up the road, where I was 8 years old. I had $5, went down to J.J. Newberry's and bought this calligraphy set with the Speedball book. Speedball still produces these books. It's one of the best lettering books published. It's a little small, probably 40-page book of just great calligraphy examples, and they're still, I think they're on like the 50th edition now, and it's always kept up contemporary. But so for $5, this and a bottle of ink is where it all started. And I tried to, this is the first hand I tried to learn. Calligraphers refer to typefaces and fonts and such as hands because we create them with our hand. So of course, as a young boy, I wanted to go with the strong Gothic hand. And of course, I didn't learn it for like 12 years later. It's not easy to learn. So when I was 22, having gotten out of the Navy and then rode my bike cross country thinking about what I was going to do next, and couch surfing on a friend's couch in Washington, D.C., this guy said, I decided to re-enlist in the Navy. So I did. And I was couch surfing, and one of my roommates was getting out of the Navy at the time and reading the Washington Post classified ads. And he said, Rick, this guy wants a calligrapher in D.C. So a couple of days of that, and I said, okay, I'll go. So I came back up here to Massachusetts and got all the calligraphy I'd done for friends over the years. And this is one. So this is my work when I was like 22 years old or 21. And this is another one. I did a calendar for 1983. And I brought pieces like that to Tolley Studios in Washington, just a block from the White House, founded by one of the early calligraphers of the White House. And that's what they showed me. So I had signed up for the Navy, and I had 8 weeks of unemployment until I could go in. And knowing full well that that was my situation, I told them I would do it for minimum wage. I was so amazed. And they said they hired me for a little bit more. They saw something because, of course, I was nowhere near this. I think they saw the enthusiasm. I was a clean-cut young man. Even in the 80s, how many young men pursued calligraphy? It's not the kind of thing that many people do. So anyways, after working for them, that's what it looked like in the back of the studio. There we were. 1983, there were 3 studios in Washington, D.C. like this, and there were 4 or 5 full-time calligraphers, 40 hours a week, inscribing certificates, what we were doing. I loved it so much, I called the Navy after about 2 weeks and said, I'm not coming. There was no conflict. I hadn't raised my hand and made the final signature, so that was the end of that, but I had found my calling there. So these 3 studios with 4 or 5 full-time calligraphers, we were doing primarily certificates for all the national lobbying organizations, all the national headquarters for so many industries are in Washington. That was the bulk of it, and the government is big on giving out certificates, or was in the 80s, and that was keeping us busy. This is the sort of work we did. This is, I couldn't find much of my old work from that studio, so that's my colleague Barbara Sweet. These are the people who basically trained me as an apprentice. And then you would work your way up until you could learn how to work with gouache, learn several calligraphic hands, learn layout, and over time you would be developing to do nice elaborate certificates and borders and such. One of the best parts about Tolly's Studios, this was done by me years after Tolly's, was if you got good enough with engrosser script, you could go to the State Department and date presidential appointments. If you really, actually, what would happen is presidential appointments, there's thousands of them given in every administration, and it's a beautiful engraved certificate. And the calligraphers at Tolly's who had the contract when I was there had to match that engraver script perfectly on the fill-ins for the dates and the title of the position and such. So that was a position you really wanted to aspire to at Tolly's. And then after a point, as a calligrapher, I wasn't making enough money with a young family and such, so I went off and worked in graphics for a few years and exhibit design. And the exhibit company I was in folded in around 1987, and within a week of that folding, I got a phone call from a calligrapher friend who said, the State Department needs somebody to sit in as a calligrapher in the protocol office while the United Nations is going on every year in September. The United Nations opens up, so a whole lot of U.S. foreign policy shifts to New York. And the Secretary of State, you know, you can't have diplomacy without calligraphy. That's kind of 101 in international politics. So you got a calligrapher in Washington and New York, and I got to sit in. And then that very year, the State Department calligrapher, who was a protocol officer, was her husband gets stationed overseas, and she left. So I was at the right place at the right time. And this is my standard form 171. In the 80s, you love the unemployed. In the 80s, it was a thing in Washington to hire these companies that would type these for you. And they would know all the equivalent of keywords, and they would put all the right language in and all that. And I was kind of bullheaded, you know, as a calligrapher. Well, it's a calligraphy job. I'm going to hand letter it. And against everybody's advice, I did that. I did pay somebody. I remember it was $100. It was a lot for me then to type it, and they had 3 or 4 typos in it. And I was like, forget it, I'm going to hand letter it. So this is it. And my great claims to getting this job was unemployed and bicycled around across the country. I got it. So, you know, in hindsight, I wonder why I got it, how I got it. I was certainly prepared as a calligrapher. I had that going for me. I was a veteran. I had that going for me. But I wonder about this part. As it turned out, the chief of protocol who hired me, Joseph Werner Reed, was very close to the Reagan administration. This is during the Bush administration. But he was the one who played in the background with Iran to keep the hostages held longer during the Reagan campaign. And I was a Persian linguist in the Navy, so we talked a little bit about that without my knowing anything about what his position was with all that. So that was pretty interesting. So at the calligrapher's office, you see the front entrance of the C Street entrance of the State Department. I had a window office just to the right of that little portico, right there on the ground floor. It was fantastic. And this is upstairs, the Benjamin Franklin room, up on the 7th floor of the State Department. If you ever go to Washington and looking for something to do, call the State Department and ask for a tour of the diplomatic reception rooms. They're just beautiful history, gorgeous, gorgeous project in restoring all of these rooms where great diplomacy does happen. Also, the State Department Protocol Office works with Blair House, the President's Guest House. President's Guest House is reserved for visiting heads of state only, except for families of deceased presidents and incoming presidents, so certain occasions. But this is State Department property, pretty much, Blair House.
Is that where they stay now?
Is where they stay now?
Yeah.
Yeah. For state visits only, the heads of state won't stay there every time they come to America. It's only during certain visits, state and official visits only. And it's actually 3 houses all put together in one now. It's a whole kind of complex in there. So when I got to the State Department, the woman who preceded me was a protocol officer, and she had an interest in calligraphy, but she was not a calligrapher. She told me she wasn't, and when I got there, I had a little slant desk and a film canister of ink and a little quill pen, and that was it. So what I quickly saw as the office in the events office I worked in was how much attention everybody was paying to selection of flowers, selection of china, silverware, tablecloths, the whole visual, and of course the food and the selection of courses to go and such. So as an artist, that for me was like a great opportunity. Oh, I can do whatever I want here, which I did because I was the only calligrapher. There were no other artists even to bounce things off of. So when I started coming out with things like this, they'd never had this at the State Department. And they loved it. They were pretty blown away by taking influences from the visiting dignitaries and putting that into the art and such. Changing up the calligraphic hands depending on the nature of the event. Being playful with letters instead of just static, on black on white. This dinner here happened to be, yeah, it was it? It was 1,000 people. In Denver at the G8 summit in 1997, I got out there on a Monday for the summit, and the dinner was on Thursday, I think. So I had, with no concept, I didn't know what the food was going to be. I didn't know the setup. I didn't know anything. So on Monday, I learned all about there were going to be 100 tables with cow pattern tablecloths, and I liked this open feel of this hand that I chose that reminded me of the prairie in Colorado. So, and of course, Ireland, how can you resist not doing a bunch of Celtic knotwork and fun stuff like that? The president, this is when Mary Robinson was the president of Ireland, and the president's seal of Ireland is a harp, which is down in the lower left corner of the menu. It's all hand done. So to do, these are the mechanics of calligraphy. To do a menu like this is the board art. I usually work about 200% the size of the menu, so you work whatever size is comfortable. But for every different type of writing or different size of writing, you need a different pen. So that layout required 4 different pen nibs to do that. This was in, the year 2000. So this is at the White House. Well, it was right about this time. There was an overlap. This is when we went digital, and now, I don't know if I have this, no, all of this, except for the pointed pen, real fine script, the lines, it all would have been written with one pen. It wouldn't have been centered. I just write the text, and if I get a spelling wrong or a letter I don't like, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to scan it in, clean it up digitally in Photoshop, and set up the board art. So it's like with music, if you're in a studio and you're recording in a studio, you don't hit those notes, you can dial them in. You can't do it live, right? You can. Milli Vanilli did, but it's the same with calligraphy. I became dependent when I do a lot of board art. I became dependent on the digital aspect, and when I'm challenged to do a really beautiful piece of original art, it induces a lot of pressure these days because I don't do it as often. So anyway, that's the old method. This is back to the State Department. This is the first menu I did with a computer. And I didn't tell anybody. The leaves drawing, that's all done by hand, but all the text is typeset in a computer. I was in a crunch. I didn't have much time to design or do this. And nobody said a word that it was like, oh, this isn't hand lettered. So it kind of opened up opportunities for me, like, oh, this doesn't all have to be hand done. So it was after 8 years of doing that at the State Department that I got a phone call from the White House to come and talk to them about doing this. And I have to say, I did it for 8 years, and you never ever get tired as a calligrapher of writing that, no matter who the president is. Yeah, I wasn't particularly happy with George Bush when I left, but I had great respect for the office, and every time I did this, he was still the president, so you just do it. So that was pretty good. There I am as a young man in the now former East Wing of the White House. This winter, I got to see on TV a claw. Oh, my office is right up here in the second floor. That was, the calligraphers had those windows, and that, I literally saw a claw go right through that section of the building. So, and yeah. And there it is from East Executive Avenue, looking over to the calligraphy windows. So this is where the calligraphers fit in this, in the White House. The calligraphers, where are we? The calligraphy office in lower left there. So the calligraphers are administratively a part of the executive residence. We work for the chief usher of the White House, and that includes the plumbers, the electricians, the butlers, the carpenters, the kitchen, the flower shop, the calligraphers, and the groundskeepers, and the housekeepers. A lot of the groundskeepers are also National Park. So, and different agencies will actually contract people out, or I've been away from the government long enough, thank good detail, I guess, people, and that's how several of the calligraphers over the years were actually detailed. This is back in the 50s, from the CIA to the calligraphy office. My predecessors came directly from the CIA to the calligraphy office. So anyway, that's the executive residence. And then it gets even more complicated because for a period of time, my paycheck came from the Department of Defense, and for another period it came from the National Park Service. So how they move money around in the White House is pretty interesting. So that was the chief usher. I had to answer to him, but he didn't tell me what to do on a daily basis. That was a social secretary who's typically very close to the First Lady, and that's where all of our day-to-day operations came from. So this is a little historic piece. It's just a beautiful piece from 1939 at the White House, a horseshoe-shaped table with the President and Mrs. Roosevelt hosting His Majesty the King of Great Britain and Her Majesty the Queen. And as you work your way out from the center of the table, you get further and further away in rank. You know, the most senior people right in the middle and around. And the calligraphers would routinely do these for dinners back in the 30s, 40s, even up into the 50s. They would have the confidence to hand letter this and put it on a pedestal or on a little easel so people could find their seat without it being a complicated thing. And they were beautiful. But nowadays, even when I was there in the 20 years ago, people drop and shift and names change so frequently. At black tie dinners, the calligraphers are always there in the background to do place cards last minute, and it was invariable that we had to do them. So that's how quickly things change nowadays. So, and this is in the 80s. The calligraphers still had time to do interesting things like this. This was during the Reagan administration, and it's a compilation of state dinner guests. So there's 100 total, it says, but the state dining room seats 139, and I don't think the Reagans ever did anything big out on the South Lawn. They may have moved something to the East Room where you can fit close to 200 people seated, but the breakdown was still pretty much the same up until, I don't know with the current administration, but I'm still close with the current chief calligrapher of the White House. And it was all structured about the same. You would have this official party, and that's the State Department people in the diplomatic part of the United States. It's up on the top. On the left side, you've got Supreme Court Justice and wife, 2 cabinet officers, 4 senators and congressmen, 2 top military couples, 1 state governor or mayor couple, 2 White House special assistant couples. So you kind of see it's kind of like reaching out into other aspects of our government, not just the executive branch, to round out this dinner. And then it gets interesting here. 1 couple from the arts, 2 celebrity couples, 2 fat cats couples, big contributors. 2 leading business couples, head of major industries, 1 labor couple, 1 couple from the educational field. So it's kind of interesting to see how they would structure these. And they still largely think about, the biggest dinner in town that night, that's for sure. You can only have 139 people. How are you going to pare it down? And the way that they got around it when I was there was to have big 500-person events out on the South Lawn. So you'd get a lot more people. One of my colleagues, Rick Muffler, another calligrapher there, worked, he's passed, but he was my age, and he worked there since he was 18 in the calligraphy office. He said that over the years, Democrats had the big, wide open, big platform and inclusive, and they would have big, huge events, whereas the Republicans were usually a little more inclusive, smaller, just different structure. Not that one's bad or not. The big ones kept us, highly employed, so that was good. But messy business. This is what the office looked like. You see, it's a production office. It's in the White House. Most offices, you walk in the White House and they're kind of like you might expect, pretty clean and nice desks and stuff. But this was a graphics production place right in the East Wing. Laura Bush, just boxes, always invitations and programs floating in and out. This is one of the black tie dinners. It's quite a process to seat a dinner of, let's just say, 200 people. The calligraphers are responsible for making sure that guest gets into the assigned seat. And there's no interference in between. There is sometimes. People do really strange things. People go into the White House and move place cards. And to have this close, to be able to watch this stuff, we don't hand it off to an intern, a volunteer, another staff member. The 2 calligraphers watch these escort cards and envelopes and organize them. We put them on the table, and we read around and proof, so it's foolproof, bulletproof. Everybody always gets the seat they want. So when George Bush, 43, was that his number? George W. Bush was elected and came. Laura Bush had the calligraphers and the florists, and I think maybe the chefs up to private residence, like within 2 or 3 days for tea, to talk with us, get to know us. And then she came down to the office within another week or so, and she saw that mess and kind of rolled her eyes and said, okay, so what can we do? And 3 years later, that's the new office. She got private funded money to redo the White House calligraphy office, and I had the pleasure of carte blanche to design it however I wanted it to be functional but look good, and that's what we got. And that's my successor, Pat Blair, who is no longer there. So it is still a little bit messy, but it's much neater from when you walk in. You don't see that part. Here I am putting out the place cards and such. Again, this is our process. This would be hand lettered, scanned into the computer, sent off to the engraver, and turned into an engraving plate and engraved. And then when it came back, I had to fill in the guest name to match perfectly, just like that old State Department thing. We had to fill in, this is the same hand, to match so that it looked like the name was also engraved in the certificate, in the invitation. And that was sent in a nice dark blue envelope, and each one was hand addressed in gold ink for the 200th anniversary of the White House. This little coat of arms around the presidential seal, there's no no other year in White House history have they done anything like that. And when the Clintons, they were big into branding, the Clintons, and the millennium was huge for them. So they wanted everything to have a special look in the year 2000. So you can't do anything to the presidential coat of arms without going through Congress, supposedly. But wait till our current president gets wind of this. So, but we decided we could do something around it. So this was my design for 2000. So all the events in 2000 had that. So this is how I looked at design. When I got to the White House, if you had gone to state dinners at the White House all through the Reagan, Bush, all the way from Carter forward years, you would see a menu that looked like this. And no matter what dinner you went to, that's what it would look like. And coming with my background at the State Department, how much fun I was having, I thought that maybe we do try to introduce different influences as much as we can. So I thought we should make the menu really stand out as fitting that particular occasion. So for the dinner, these are both the same event, the governors of states and territories. So there's a couple things going on. My philosophy is when you have an event, a menu, really the primary thing that people should read is what the dinner's for, what the occasion is, who it's in honor of. So therefore I put that as a big header, whereas while the other one is a header, what you really read is dinner. You kind of already know you're at a dinner. So, and then they separated the wines from the courses, and I felt it was better that since they were paired together, they should appear together. And then doing things like hand-painted flags. Those flags are hand-painted on every menu. So for a dinner of 200 people, these would pass under my hand 600 times. For those of you who are artists, paint the blue field on everyone, and then the red field, and then the little white stars. So yeah, it takes a little while, but it's worth it. They're beautiful. They're fun. Actually, and this is a combination of using computer and hand lettering. You know, the Roman, I'm not going to take all that time to draw perfect Romans. Typeface will do it just fine. And that's a place setting. So this is how close attention Laura Bush paid to the work that we did. I left the office early one day and got a phone call from the social secretary that Mrs. Bush was leaving soon and she wanted a mock-up of the president's birthday invitation. So I dashed home, I grabbed a colored pencil, a couple colored pencils, and I jotted this thing and I wrote down Laura Bush, and I put in the email, this is the layout, that's the calligraphic hand I'll use, and I got the sign off, okay, go ahead. And I don't have the one that got back because I threw them all away. It came back with that invitation on the right, that's what the calligraphy looked like, because that's what I told her it would look like, but she thought it was going to look like the top. She said, that's not what I wanted. She really wanted that top one. So I got rid of the old ones and we reprinted them to look like like the other one. Pretty funny. This is possibly coming from the State Department. Over the years, if I had friends who traveled with the president overseas, I'd ask them to collect the invitations and stuff so we could see what they're doing in other countries. And I noticed that they were always in 2 languages. If it wasn't the host country's language wasn't English, they would still do it in English. So when the Bushes came, their first state dinner was Mexico on September 5th, and they went for it. So we did it was the first state visit to be done in 2 languages. And the art around here, the leaves on the left and right are elements of the Mexican flag. In both languages on when you opened up the program. Yeah, isn't this interesting? This is when George Bush looked into the eyes of Mr. Putin and saw the soul of a good man. Again, I chose that hand that I did in Denver because it reminded me of the prairie, and Laura Bush loved, the openness in the prairie, and she had a very clean sense of design. So I thought that was a nice hand. And that's the ranch in Crawford. This is not a White House menu, but it's one of my very favorite from my time in Washington. from Mstislav Rostropovich, the conductor of the National Symphony Orchestra. But what I liked about this was how personal it was. The pieces of music between the courses are specifically favorites of his. We had his assistants, snoop around and find out. So, yeah, I thought, we'll have music between the courses, but what do I know about music? So whatever I put, he would read it like, what's this? But these were very specific, and I'm sure he knew right what they were. And favorite composers of his, every course is named after a favorite composer of his, except for Galina Greens, that's his wife, is Galina. So, nice stuff, yeah. Yeah. So it was, putting that personal touch into this art was real important and made it work.
Was it fun? Was it fun to do? Because that was very creative.
Absolutely fun, yeah, that's when it was most fun. When you had time to be creative and could. There wasn't much time. You had to learn to be creative under crunch time. So one of the great joys of when Laura Bush was there again, and her interest in children's literature particularly, she enlisted wonderful children's book artists to work with the White House to do the holiday tour book. And I got to work with, this is Elise Primavera, I believe, Jerry Pinkney and Stephen Kellogg are the three that I got to work with. And I had young boys at the time. I'd just been reading all their books too, so that was a real pleasure for me. So what would happen is that artist would come to the White House in September and sit with the First Lady and the designer of the holiday season concepts, and then go away. In October, I'd get this big package of art that I could do whatever I wanted for holiday events such as the tour book. And just got to put that art, used it for invitations. That's Barney. Yeah, when people think, you get to be the State Department calligrapher, White House calligrapher, you're doing lots of proclamations and certificates and treaties, testimonials, none of it. This is as close as I ever got to that. It was a gift from President Clinton to the Prime Minister of Greece, and it was a quote from, I believe it was President Monroe. I don't remember. Anyways, that was a gift from our president to the Prime Minister of Greece. I thought it would be interesting to do it on papyrus. That was a real challenge because, papyrus is an ancient form of paper that was used back then, and it's very, very difficult to write on, pounded reeds. Somebody asked me earlier today if, in addressing all these envelopes, was there anybody that you really had an like wow moment about? Not envelopes specifically, but I really loved doing Beverly Cleary's National Medal of Arts, because when I was in second grade, she was my favorite author. I read all the Ralph and Motorcycle books, Henry Huggins and all that. So that was really, the second grade boy in me was like, wow, Beverly Cleary. So, yeah, after 8 years of interesting newspapers on the front of my door, it was pretty weird to be in the White House and walk to work. At the Washington Post was at our door every day, and in the office, and to walk into the Clinton White House while he was being impeached was pretty surreal. Anyways, I wasn't happy with the war, and I really wasn't. I was in the city many, many, many years longer than I should have been anyway, so I left. I came back to the water. And so that artistic journey began. Now all of a sudden I didn't have any more assignments. I didn't know what they wanted it to look like. And literally, this is the first quote and the first attempt at the first quote I did after I left. And I'm proud now to say it's awfully static. It doesn't say it how I wanted it to say it. But this is the process that I've gone through for those years since. The one on the left was my first approach at breaking out and using color and being a little loose. It wasn't vibrant enough, so I used colored pencils on dark paper. And I thought that was too dark for the quote. And then I came up with the third concept on the right, and that's kind of the direction I wanted that quote to go. So it's trying to feel get the feeling of the meaning of the words and interpreting these things through art. This is a particularly fun one because I wanted to pull, the concept being this is actually done on a piece of black paper about this big, and the gray is so dark that you have to kind of peer into the paper to read the gray. It's a poem that many of us know. Ships that pass in the night and speak each other in passing, only a signal shown and a distant view in the darkness. So on the ocean of life we pass and speak one another, only a look and a voice, then darkness again and a silence. So what had happened is I was racing around Cape Cod. There's a sailboat race around Cape Cod, and about 3 in the morning, you know, I've been up all night just sailing away, and all of a sudden we saw running lights off in the distance, and everybody in the boat kind of like leaned into the darkness, trying to pick up a sail number or whatever. And I wanted to get that leaning into the darkness in this poem. So, and little dots of gold leaf for the running lights on the sailboats. I went haywire with compass roses. Who doesn't like compass roses? It's a geometric wonder. So, probable northeast to southwest winds varying to the northward and westward and eastward and points between. I'm sure you all familiar with that happening. I get into this series of towns. I've done quite a few of them. This is 3 inches tall, little miniature paintings of features within each town. Mystic having the Charles Morgan and that light. And so here I took a walk one summer from Mexico to Canada, the Pacific Crest Trail. And that's all the elevations, that watercolors, all the elevations of the Pacific Crest Trail. And there's about 60 places I stopped to resupply along the way that are listed in uncial letters going up into the sky. It was shortly after that hike that I discovered Mary Oliver and her beautiful poems. This one is Sleeping in the Forest, and I very quickly came up with this image of what does it look like to see the moon sleeping in the forest. Having done it for 4.5 months, it came right to me. And that's a detail. So, you know, you'll see here my lettering is becoming much more free in the trade-off to create more exciting graphics. We start giving up legibility in order to create more excitement. Then I got a little boat and kayaked from Cape Cod to Canada and back one summer. And this is one of the charts. You'll see the little red lines following the coast, and every island that I stayed on was gold leaf, and there's 2 lines, 1 line out and 1 line back, different dots of that journey. Yeah. And a lino cut. I was speaking to somebody today about prints, also inspired by that trip. So no letters, not a single letter to be found in that one. So here's a piece I've done on the ocean that trying to capture, again, this is that black letter, right? It speaks of strength. Black letter does. It's a good solid Gothic feel to it. But I wanted to have this movement because it's about the ocean. So I introduced movement through a changing palette and through flourishes on the outer edges of the piece, but keeping that pattern consistent throughout. And the red at the top was simply because of the words, they who possess the sea within their blood. And it's a beautiful poem by Marguerite Janvrin Adams, basically a proclamation to Poseidon about how powerful one's love for the sea can be. This is my Monet's Haystacks. For me, it's Sea Fever by John Masefield. I've probably done it, 50 times in the course of my life. And this is the most recent one. It's an acrylic painting about 2 feet long, and that's all done on acrylic, trying to create texture with letters. This is a collaboration with a painter friend. I asked her if she would do a painting that we could collaborate, and I would do calligraphy on it. And she did this painting. First, we found the words, and it was Haiku Jane, a haiku writer out in the Sonoma coast. And then we sat with it for a while, and she came up with this painting without the letters, and I had the painting in my studio for about a month as I thought about writing letters across the white frothy wave crest, or where I was going to put the letters. And I came up with just doing them with a lighter palette of her writing in a varnish. Her painting is flat and the letters are varnish, so it's got a nice little texture, but getting much more painterly now. This is, I don't know if anybody here is interested in the monoline class that's coming up, but this is the kind of stuff that comes out of monoline lettering. Monoline being only one thickness to the letter. There's no thicks and thins like Romans. And I use them to create texture, and in this case, painting a background between the letters. This is a John Muir quote, and that's Yosemite Valley, which is closely associated with John Muir since he so instrumental in saving that. Another John Muir quote, trying to capture the sun coming through the redwood trees. Another John Muir quote. That's small letters about 3/16 of an inch with a very fine pointed pen. And this is a typeface called Futuracha that I've kind of dissected and introduced a couple of my own rules to it, such as extending diagonals and verticals to as far as you want. And by adhering to these rules, you create these mosaic stained glass-like paintings out of this certain kind of approach to this hand. And then I found out about using the beach as a canvas, and this is my friend Andrew Vandermerve, lives in South Africa. This is a South African tribal alphabet or script or whatever that he's used here. And notice Andrew carves this to look like incised letters, like they're cut in stone, but you don't see any footprints, you don't see any debris. Pretty slick, huh? So us calligraphers are known for sharing very easily with each other, but when I contacted him, he didn't want to tell me his secret. Very apologetically, he was, because he just put so much effort into it, and as it turns out, he shares it willingly now. He teaches workshops. He came here to Wareham and taught a workshop on beach art not too long ago. So that was one of my early approaches to Andrew's. This is out on Nauset Beach. That's the trick. The bucket holds the sand that you scoop out of every letter, and those little shoes, I routed the edges up so it's like a big snowshoe. It doesn't leave any prints in the sand. And then I discovered Andre Amador out in the San Francisco Bay Area, who does this real large scale. This is very geometric, very perfect, absolute stuff. He also does really organic things, very, very large scale. And between the two, I got this vision going, you know, I wanted to do something. So my first approach was out at Whitecrest Beach in Wellfleet. So to do beach art in the sand, for it to show up requires the sun to be behind it. It's like a silk rug. If the sun's on this side looking at you, you're not going to see it. So on Cape Cod, of course, that means you have to do your art before sunrise. And the tide has to be going out. So I was out there at 3 in the morning, happily raking away this 150-foot in diameter circle, time and tide, wait for no man. I couldn't get a whole picture of it because when I climbed up the bluff, it was too close for my camera to get the whole thing. So anyway, that was my first attempt at it. And I practiced a lot. I'd lived out near the Sonoma coast for 8 years, and I spent a lot of time out on the beach practicing this stuff. There you go. So
Yeah.
that was the letter A. Would it take me about 20 seconds, 30 seconds, probably do that? So imagine if you were going to write a poem and every letter took 20 or 30 seconds, it'd take forever. So, but I had this vision all along that I wanted to do a big, long poem on the beach. I've done days and days and days of beach art, and it just never, when it's letters, it doesn't look particularly good. I would get my neighbors out in the hills in California to go out when we'd have play days on the beach and just do beach art. And you do mandalas, that they look beautiful, they're wonderful, they're fun. You do abstract stuff, geometric stuff, it all works, but letters don't seem to work, except for this vision I had, and here it goes. Yeah, and that was that. Thank
What beach was that on? What beach was that on?
you. That was Bodega Head, just about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. Val and I just watched the birds the other day, and that's in Bodega. That was pretty cool to see.
So did you use a drone for the photography?
Yeah, so, you know, it is true, all those, all that art I did at the beach, it's just, it wasn't for naught, because any day on the beach is a good day, and any day doing art is a good day, so that was all good, but it never looked good photographically. It's got lots of it. But I had this vision to do this video, and I was given a talk in San Francisco, and I told people in the audience about that I needed a videographer, and somebody recommended, gosh, I forgot her name right now, it just blocked from me. She wanted Ellie McCutcheon, Ellie, and I saw her website, and I was like, oh yeah, she gets it. I knew right away. And she was in the Bay Area, so she come out to Bodega, and she kind of lives the van life. She's got a van and all of her cool drone stuff, and it was blowing like 22 knots out there, and I think 25 is her limit. And she had 2 drones going and shooting all that stuff, and then edit it. Yeah, she made that. She, you know, I could have written that all year long, but she was the one who captured it the way she did on film. It's beautiful. So one other thing about this beach stuff, you know, you've got this wonderful horseneck beach and all the sand. Whether it's calligraphy or drawing or what, bring a steel rake to the beach someday at low tide and just try it. It's wonderful. It's doing this full body action of stuff that we usually restrict ourselves to. You know, in letters, I'm always doing 1/2-inch letters, 1/8-inch letters. And so to come out and do full body, whatever it is you draw is really a fun sensation. Yep. So, yeah, any questions about Washington or any of the letters?
How long did it take you to do that?
Oh, yeah, so it took 20 seconds or 30 seconds to do the A. By the time, I practiced that about 9 or 10 times, different tides, different days. It took me 45 minutes. You had a question in the back?
Just at the White House, is it a different group that does the Christmas cards and that process?
Yeah, we didn't address the Christmas cards, no.
Volunteer group?
The years I was there, we did the inside of the Christmas card, because I was like, why have a typesetter do the inside? We could at least do that. But they contract different artists, and I think Hallmark usually printed them, and the calligraphers didn't address them. If you remember the cabinet, we probably addressed that too.
I was curious, you did the place cards for all these dignitaries when they were showing up for a meal or a dinner, and you were in charge of their seating. Is that something that goes way back? Because I just found that to be a really interesting component, that they left you, like it was your responsibility to make sure that...
Yeah, it goes way back. Calligraphy office, it's an interesting role they play because they're also the institutional knowledge on protocol. Not the protocol office, and they're, depending on the administration and how things are, protocol and the social office kind of either like each other a lot or kind of, you know, don't get along so well, but they're interconnected and they work closely because those matters of protocol, what order you seat people, how you address people, all these sorts of things. It's important that those two offices speak with each other. But the White House calligraphers, you know, it's pretty funny. On January 20th, I showed up in the morning and spoke with the social secretary. You know, the Clintons were all getting ready to leave and all that kind of stuff. And then that afternoon, by 4 o'clock, there were pictures of, you know, George W. Bush in the halls. The new social secretary was in. That one day, you're working for a whole different team. The only consistency for them is the calligraphers, which is kind of interesting in that part. You know, they can choose to use us effectively or not. They might have their own ideas, and we just serve whatever they want to do. And in that role, you have to be prepared for all aspects of that. It's pretty tricky stuff.
When you use a poem in an artwork, do you have to do...
No, never wrote copyright.
So you use someone else's poem?
Use somebody else's art?
Poem.
Oh, you're talking about like Mary Oliver or something like that? I typically try to use dead poets for most of it. And sell that. And I used to, Mary Oliver lived up in P-Town much of the year, and I kind of wanted to stalk the trails, hoping to catch her and walk to talk to her about that, because a lot of calligraphers have done her work. Her poetry's beautiful. She was such a popular poet, and it's like, I'd like to think it was her publisher's idea, not hers, that it wouldn't be done, because I think it's a real tribute for an artist to put time into your words and turn it into a different form of art. So we never had that conversation, but I couldn't sell prints of that or anything, no. John Masefield, I can sell them all day long.
I have a question. Can you tell me what now using digital calligraphy and like with AI coming into the mix, like what changes that will be for calligraphers?
answer that at all. Asking. Calligraphy versus type, how type is taking over calligraphy, and then the next stage, how is AI going to affect all this? Couldn't even guess. But AI can never take the pleasure of wet ink on paper from me, so, that's just what it is. But commercially, I do a lot of my stuff on the computer. I don't want to compete with type. I had a client recently, I was doing certificates for somebody, and the citations are so long that I was going to have to write like almost a 16th of an inch, and I don't care who you are, it's not going to look good that size, but type will look fine that size. So,
Does the present administration have this calligrapher?
yeah, the current administration has a calligrapher. I'll have a couple words about that. Leanne Clark, she's from out west, but she's been a Baltimore calligrapher for many years, 20 or more years. She's been there about 4 or 5 years now, and she's a nice lady. We communicate, freely, openly, but I was at a conference with both her, one of the other, there's 3 calligraphers at the White House. Leanne Clark's the chief calligrapher, and a woman named Becky, who I'd never met until then, and the State Department calligrapher, which is a job I used to have. We're all at this conference, and they were so tight-lipped, they couldn't say anything in either way about anything. They were scared, and the Washington Calligraphers Guild did every 10 years or so, they do a publication on protocol in Washington, because calligraphers are involved in both protocol up at Capitol Hill and for all the agencies and such, and the State Department and White House calligraphers couldn't contribute to that this time. So
Who's the last comment you read?
the State Department and White House calligraphers could not contribute to that publication this time. They were barred. So I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's terrible. But it's what it is. They are still trying to make beautiful art. I know them as artists, and that's what they do. So that's good. But I think it's a shame that they can't share that work publicly. If the White House chief calligrapher wants to share their work, it's all out in the public. It's invitations and menus. They're already out there. So, but they can't talk. Yes?
So you're doing this with, what did you do when you made a mistake?
Well, Photoshop. But way back in the beginning, electric erasers we used to use at the studios, and you never wanted to be using it because the studios are wonderful to work in. 4 or 5 full-time calligraphers, and all you would hear is like the little labor of a calligrapher, the scratching of a pen, the dipping of pens. There's this quiet kind of noise. But then somebody would get the electric eraser, like, zzz, and you'd say, oh, okay, somebody made a mistake. I'm really good at scraping down with a razor blade, too. I don't have an electric eraser anymore, but I'll scrape paper down with a razor blade. And then you put some Sanderac in it, kind of seal it up and write over it.
For the spacing, or do you make some lines?
Oh, I always draw guidelines. I call it scaffolding. I always lay out my work pretty tight. Yeah.
Yes, I saw the little ruler at the very
Yeah, that little ruler. That little ruler. I love that little. Just 6-inch rule is like my favorite tool, right? Yep.
Do you have any thoughts or comments for people that are left-handed that are thinking about trying to, their own writing and get a little bit better at lettering, but are nervous to, smudge everything they write?
What's your purpose, for handwriting or for calligraphy? Or?
Probably for wash sometimes, and I would like to be able to add some lettering without it looking so childish or poor or just not good.
Well, Buffalo at the White House was a lefty, and he was faster than anybody and a beautiful hand. He had the hook.
The hook.
Yeah. And if the hook doesn't work, but when I teach, I tell people to orient the paper however is comfortable for you. So forget about it being right on you. If you're left-handed, you might even do it upside down. Whatever makes those strokes work for you is what works. And it can be done. If you give me an email, I'll send you a whole stack of instructions from the Educator and Business Educator magazines about how to deal with left-handed writers. Oh, they're like criminals back in the last century. Yeah, how to deal with your left-handed student. Not nice. So I have lots of articles about that. Yeah.
Before we break up, not that I want to, but I did want to ask about, since I record all the education around here, Rick's, do you want to talk about your class,
The upcoming class.
Magnificent Monoline.
It's called the Magnificent Monoline Letter. Monoline is being, as I said earlier, just one thickness. I'm introducing this class here because you don't need any calligraphic background. When you work with monoline, you don't have to worry about pen angles and thicks and thins and so much structure of perfect Roman letters. As you may have seen with some of the more contemporary stuff, that's part of the class. I'll show you the keys to that. And then stuff like this, these are not perfect letter forms using monoline. So it's 6 weeks of playing with this pen in a whole range of ways how to copy a type, because type is derived from originally hand lettering, and there's nothing to stop us from stealing from them back. It is kind of fun to have that interchange. And different treatments, layering and shading and using masking fluid, and it's just a real playful 6 weeks of messing about with letters. Yep, gets into, did I have asemic stuff? No, not here. Yeah, there's some handouts in there from the class out in the lobby there. So yeah, sign up, it's a fun time. I'm an easy teacher, very calm, I don't yell, nobody's ever cried in my classes.
I have an unrelated question. How long did it take you to bike across the country?
I was a young man, and I went way more miles than I should have and didn't take in the country as I should have. I averaged 92 miles a day. Back when I got out of the Navy and didn't know, I was assistant harbor master at Harwich that summer, and at the end of the summer, I've always wanted to ride my bike cross country, so I did. And I went from east to west. That's wrong. Anybody here's a sailor, they know the prevailing winds are from the west. I gave myself a headwind the whole way across country. That's pretty stupid. I could have gone across, Nebraska, Nevada. I could have zipped across those with a headwind, with a tailwind. I would have zoomed across. Instead, I fought it the whole way. But I rode from Cape Cod. There was a thing called the East Coast Bicycle Trail. The League of American Wheelmen, big bicycle lobbying thing did, where roads that would follow close to the base of the Appalachians all the way down the East Coast. So I rode from Cape Cod out to like Hartford, Connecticut, down to DC, and I had this brilliant idea. I wanted to take a boat across, the top of the Upper Peninsula over into Wisconsin, and when I left DC, by the time I got to State College, Pennsylvania, it was freezing at night, so I knew I wasn't going to go to Michigan. So I got to Cleveland, then I went down to New Orleans for the World's Fair, then out to LA, then up to San Francisco. So I rode across and north-south the country, yeah. Not knowing what I was going to do.
How many
But
miles?
my timing could have been perfect, though, because had I not done that, I would have been on the couch and, my friend's couch in October going in the Navy, and that job would have opened up. So you never know. Well, there you have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.